today's recording will be translated simultaneously into Chinese and Spanish. So we'll need to make sure that everybody is in the right channel. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Eric.
How are you? Are you which part of the country are you in now?
I'm in the Netherlands at the moment.
Okay, that is I think there's a Peter Strappers is there also with you. He has joined us, which is good. So we have people all the way. So we have people from China. Some people join us from Brazil, from Chile. So we have all different time zones. So the 50. Okay, give it maybe another few minutes.
Eric.
Yes. In Australia, Camilo, how are you? All the way from Canberra. Must be what? Midnight now.
Eric, I'm getting the Chinese translation of you.
You guessing what? You getting Chinese translation?
I can hear you very faintly, but I'm getting the Chinese translation as feedback.
Me too.
Maybe you are. What channel are you in, Peter?
I didn't hear that.
What channel are you in interpretation?
I'm in the English channel. The English channel.
Get yourself out at the moment. Might be
okay.
Good.
Original audio. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that's better. Yeah.
Eric, I can see the Chinese translate as well.
Yes, in the English channel. So can you ask Jen? Can you ask please the interpreter to speak
I'm talking with her.
Chinese in the Chinese channel, please?
Yeah.
We trying to work out this interpretation, which will be simultaneously the stock interpreted in Chinese and into Spanish, and we're having a little bit of technical difficulties as you can imagine. So, but we'll get there. So it'll be all good. But I can see there's a Jamnik from Poland. Very good. Whereabouts in Poland, Jamnik?
Jamnik is a name for dog, but my boyfriend.
I'm so sorry. It says on your account, Jamnik.
Yeah, it is. Hello from Krakow.
Krakow. So you're not Jamnik then?
I'm from Krakow, and it's rainy day.
Yeah, but are you saying Jamnik is name for a dog? That
no,
means
no,
that
this is nickname. This is just nickname, funny nickname. I'm not Reskashibun.
边同学，你选择了那个英文频道，需要调换到中文频道。
We still trying to sort out this interpretation. We'll get there. Another. Is it going to happen, Jen?
Yeah, I already taught her to change to Chinese channel right now.
Fantastic. Very good.
Texting that.
Hello, Juan. From Colombia. Amazing. That's good. So you have Colombia. We have Sweden, Princess. Whereabouts in Sweden you are in, Princess? No, we don't hear anything from Princess. Yep. Go ahead. Stockholm, did you say?
Yeah, in the chat. Everyone's introducing themselves in the chat at the moment.
Yeah, I know. I can see that. Yeah, it's good to sometimes just to hear somebody's voice also, and to see where they are. Yeah. So I think we might be maybe getting ready slowly. So before we kick off, this talk will be interpreted simultaneously into Spanish and English. Chinese. So Spanish and Chinese. The talk will be given in English. Nevertheless, it will be important that you get yourself in the right channel. So we have 3 channels. We have an English channel, we have a Chinese channel, and we have a Chinese channel, and a Spanish channel. The reason you have to get yourself in the right channel is that if somebody asks a question, let's say in Spanish, then that will be interpreted back into English so you can understand the question, for example. So, so you will see on your Zoom bar, you either see a globe and says interpretation. And if you don't see it, then there'll be like 3 dots. If you click on the 3 dots, it will say more, then select interpretation, and then you can select a channel which you would like to listen the talk in. So again, you either select English, Spanish, or Chinese, but do select one of those. Otherwise, you won't be able to hear. If somebody will ask question in other language but English, you won't be able to hear it. Ursula, would you like to say this instruction in Spanish, and then we go to Jen. She will say this in Chinese, okay?
Of course, of course. So, buenos días y bienvenidas a todos. Les contamos a quienes nunca se han sumado a estas, que vienen por primera vez. Nuestra sesión está traducida o interpretada del inglés al chino y al español. Para poder acceder a la interpretación en el idioma que ustedes escojan, deben elegir abajo en el signo de globo terráqueo, deben elegir el canal y el idioma correspondiente. ¿Ya? Eso es importante, aunque la charla va a ser en inglés, que seleccionen el canal del inglés para poder escuchar las preguntas si las hacen en chino o en español. ¿Ok?
Jen, would you mind just saying in Chinese for the Chinese participants? They are aware of the interpretation, please.
欢迎大家来到我们今天的会议。这个会议是由 Eric 组织举办的一个国际会议。那么我们的主办方呢，也包括了山东工艺美术学院。这个会议将会提供中文频道，大家可以在中文频道中收听这个会议的内容。
So we can all go into the right channel now, and then I'll pass the screen to Ursula Bravo from UDD in Santiago de Chile.
Bueno, gracias, gracias Eric, y muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí.
Ursula, I don't get any English translation.
Yeah.
Yes, now I can.
It's okay now? Ya, gracias. Sí te escuchaba. Ok. Bueno, muchas gracias, Eric, y muchas gracias a todos por sumarse hoy día a esta interesante charla. Y especialmente muchas gracias, Peter, por haber aceptado nuestra invitación. Mi nombre es Úrsula Bravo, soy académica de la Universidad del Desarrollo y hoy tengo la misión, en nombre de Design Literacy International Network, de abrir la sesión, ¿ya? Pero antes de empezar, quisiera contarles que este año ha sido muy especial para Design Literacy porque celebramos nuestro 5º aniversario con 2 hitos muy importantes. En primer lugar, la firma de un Memorandum of Understanding, de un convenio de colaboración entre las 3 universidades patrocinantes. Esto es Oslo Metropolitan University, Shandong University of Art and Design y Universidad del Desarrollo. La ceremonia se realizó a fines de junio pasado en la ciudad de Oslo y fue presidida por las autoridades de las 3 universidades. Y en segundo lugar, la publicación de un número especial titulado Perspective on Design Literacy en el journal Forms Academics. Así que estas han sido 2 hitos importantes en Design Literacy y una manera muy significativa de celebrar nuestro 5º aniversario. Bueno, esto nos había tenido bien ocupados hasta ahora y por eso no habíamos podido retomar las charlas, pero hoy día las retomamos con mucha energía y mucho entusiasmo, con un invitado muy especial como es Peter Lloyd. Probablemente ustedes lo conocen por su destacada trayectoria. Peter es profesor de TU Delft, presidente de DRS, editor de Designing y ex-editor jefe de la revista líder en investigación Design Studies, entre otras muchas actividades en el mundo del diseño y la investigación. Peter lideró el curso a distancia, el diseño del curso a distancia Design Thinking Creativity for the 21st Century, que se implementó en 2010 en The Open University. Era un curso que de alguna manera se actualizaba el curso creado en 1975 por Nigel Cross, y tal vez una de las primeras, podríamos decir, iniciativas de enseñar Design Thinking a profesionales de otras áreas o al público general. Y como ese es el foco de Design Literacy, nos pareció que era muy importante tener a Peter en nuestras charlas. En lo personal conocí a Peter Lloyd en 2016 en el marco de un proyecto de investigación financiado por British Council que lideré junto a Catalina Cortés sobre la aplicación de herramientas de Design Thinking para la resolución de problemas docentes por parte de profesores chilenos. Los resultados del proyecto fueron presentados en la conferencia de DRS de Limerick y más tarde, el año pasado, en el journal Reflective Creativity. Reflective Practice. Les podré después compartir el link. Bien, creo que no necesitamos más preámbulos para empezar con darle la palabra y darle la pantalla a Peter Lloyd. Peter, muchas gracias de nuevo por estar aquí y la pantalla es tuya.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Is that okay? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, good. Thank you very much for that introduction, Ursula, and also thank you to Eric and Liv for inviting me to do this talk, and all the organization that's involved in simultaneously translating into 2 other languages. And that's a very impressive achievement. Actually reminds me of some of the technical problems that we had in teaching a distance learning course online in 2010. When Eric first asked me to do this talk, it was interesting because he picked up a paper that I wrote back in 2011. I think it was published at a DRS Cumulus conference, the first DRS Cumulus conference, where I was just talking about the development of the course and this idea of the social practitioner. And I'd sort of forgotten about that paper. And I think it's just interesting sometimes as a researcher when people remember things that you've written that you don't remember, and actually sometimes the things that you write form the theories and the ideas that other people build on in their own careers. So it was a nice reminder of a time gone past. So let me share my screen. Okay. So what I wanted to do today is really talk about 3 things, and from 3 different time periods. And hopefully they're connected. Maybe the connections aren't so obvious, but I think it's interesting to kind of explore these maybe through a discussion. So I was going to talk for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then open up to a discussion and see where that leads. So first of all, I wanted to kind of revisit the original paper, this talk, and the inspiration for this talk, and look at some of the ideas that I introduced back then, and really sort of think about those in the context that history has played out. At the time, I was introducing these concepts and thinking, what's the future going to be like? And this was in 2010. So it's sort of interesting to kind of replay that and of how things actually turned out, probably as none of us expected. Second, I wanted to look at some of the ideas of Horst Rittel. One of my current projects is looking at the origins of wicked problems. The term wicked problems. He was famous for his paper on wicked problems, and particularly what he called second generation design methods. So I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about some of the ideas of Horst Rittel that I think resonate with some of the ideas from the first part of the talk. And third, I recently wrote a blog post. I have a blog called I Profess Design. And I recently wrote a blog post looking at how design education can reach a much broader audience in university curriculums. That's been a kind of long-term interest and concern of mine, is how can design reach other disciplines? Not necessarily how can we teach design better, but how can we teach, as in the title of the talk, non-designers to not only to design, but to be aware of design, to understand what design does. And I think that's broadly very much in line with design literacy, raising the level of design literacy outside of the design discipline. So I'm just going to let the connections between these things emerge rather than making a kind of formal argument. And if I get time at the end, I was going to talk about a new master's course that I'm currently working on at Delft. We have a new master's curriculum, and I'm currently working on a new course called Design Processes and Practices, which is for designers, and thinking about some of the current issues that are affecting us, particularly developments in technology and how those might play out in the future, as I did back in 2010. So just as a general introduction to me, I've been interested in the idea of designing outside of traditional design disciplines. So although I'm very much interested in what designers do and how designers work and practice, I'm just as interested in how people that don't necessarily think that they're designers are doing design in some way. So this is the idea that, you know, that everything that we do is kind of design. But I think some professions are particularly well suited to being described as design. So, you know, kind of management, organization, most obviously, engineering, computer science. There's aspects of designing that go on in all these sort of professions. And more recently, particularly, I've begun to think of politics and policy formulation and even the law as ways of designing, and done by people that don't necessarily identify themselves as designers. So I think that's a kind of an interesting contrast to explore their design activity, even though they don't think that they are designing. So I guess my general sort of orientation is to consider that understanding design is something that's empowering to people. This was the starting point for the course that I'm going to talk about, but that design is something that gives you agency, it gives you confidence, it gives you something to work with in engaging with the world. So it's not necessarily something that is sort of corporate in the way that design thinking has become. It's sort of a more of a kind of democratizing aspect of the results of design that I'm sort of interested in. And although design can empower people in participative ways, in political ways, this isn't always for the better. Design goes to the left wing and the right wing of politics, as we'll go on to see, and I'll explore later in the talk. So that was generally the setup for my talk. So, So the first part of my talk is about the course that I led back in, which I think it started in about 2008. We started thinking about how we could teach people to design through distance learning. So the Open University in the UK is a distance learning institution. There aren't any students on the campus. And for a long time, the courses that they taught in the design discipline were really courses about design. So it was educating people about what designers do, the kind of methods that designers use, but they weren't really teaching designers, people to design. And that was the sort of starting point. And back in 2008, if you can remember back that far, the internet was quite a different thing. So although I had a sort of sense that then what we called Web 2.0 was something that we could use in going online to teach, to reach students in a more kind of dynamic way. None of the Open University courses at that time, they were all published books. So students used to receive books through the letterbox, and then they would study their books. None of the courses were online particularly. So we thought, how can we use this new technology to really engage people in the process of design? How can we teach them to be designing? So there wasn't any Facebook in 2008. There were no smartphones, so there were no apps. Many people didn't have digital cameras back then, especially our students. So we had lots of conversations about how can we get people to engage. And really, the core problem of the course was how to assess the design process independent of the outcome. So we weren't trying to teach people to kind of build their portfolios of design activity. We were trying to teach them the process of design, and hence the title of the course, which was Design Thinking, Creativity for the 21st Century. So we put this course together, and I think in the paper, I identified 3 trends at that time this is 2011. And I think it's always fun to look back at your predictions in the past and see how they actually played out. So I had the 3 developments that I identified were increasing social media. So that wasn't necessarily predicting things like Facebook, but it was, there were platforms like Flickr, the photo sharing app, that were beginning to kind of put things online for people to have discussions about. And I thought that was a good development that we could build on. The second development was the blurring of design disciplines. So the objects of design, the products of design, sort of slowly changing. And I think service design is one of those disciplines that has done that. You know, it's not obvious that a product designer will necessarily produce a product anymore. Generally, there's a kind of website or an app, there's a service, there's a kind of blurring of disciplines. And the third development was that design, even conventional design courses, would become more distanced. That students would increasingly work in different places and not necessarily come into lectures or studios, and that was a kind of interesting development for a distance learning institution. I think during COVID, we saw that, you know, very starkly, that we can teach design from a distance. We don't necessarily need students in studios to teach designing. And I think those lessons have been sort of taken out of COVID, and we've sort of embedded them in our own design education. I certainly, in teaching students now, we use a lot of kind of what we call distance learning tools, Zoom, Miro, all kinds of sort of interactive tools. So those were the 3 things that I kind of based the course on, or the development of the course. And this was the course that we produced. This is the welcome pack that students received through their door when they registered for the course. I think the first cohort of students was 350. The second was 500. And I think the course has just been redesigned now, but it's still being taught by the Open University over 15 years later. So I think there are thousands of students that have studied this course. And it's important to say that none of the students had design expertise. They had all kinds of different expertises and all kinds of age groups too. We had very young students in their 20s, students in their 70s. So a whole kind of range of students and backgrounds and interests. And in the course, what I wanted to do was to build on this fact, in a way, the different backgrounds of students and how we could get students to design together, building on each other's expertise. So that was the sort of social networking aspect of the course that we put into place, is how can people understand the expertise of others, and how can they bring that into their own processes in order to solve or work on design problems, and what kinds of tools could we design in order to help them do that, access that expertise, have those conversations, and develop their own ideas. So the problem for us was, you know, how to teach practical design experience at a distance. So one of the aspects of the course was designing new types of tools in which students could not only discuss work with each other, but submit their work electronically. We developed a tool called Compendium, which was a tool very like an early version of Miro. Now, when I saw Miro, I thought that's what we needed all along, Miro, to do this thing that we did. But it worked. And I think not only the question of how to teach practical design experience, but why teach design experience at a distance too. And I think as I began to sort of engage with the students and think about the consequences of the course, I thought, well, this is what we're doing is we're enabling people to understand what designing is in all their different areas of life and professional activity. And that really helps people to sort of engage with designers and think about what design can do in sort of their local lives, whether that's in their personal lives or in their professional lives. So it's this idea of sort of giving agency to people, empowering people to sort of address the problems around them. And I think the idea of the social practitioner it sort of came after thinking about, obviously, Donald Schoen's famous book, The Reflective Practitioner, and Herbert Simon's book, The Science of the Artificial. They both sort of, the premise of both books there is this sort of this master-servant relationship, that the expertise is sort of transferred between individuals. So you have someone that's expert and they sort of teach someone that's less expert. And it's a very sort of individualized view of design expertise. And we obviously couldn't do that by distance. So the term that I can sort of came up with this idea of the social practitioner, which was someone that was able to access the expertise of others in a kind of network of expertise, not have someone in particular that was teaching them, but really learning from other people around them. So the idea was that the students with all their different expertise would help each other to design. And that really worked quite well. There is a formal teaching setup. Tutors help the students, they support the students through their learning and assess their work. But really the idea that students helped each other really worked incredibly well, and actually made me think, yeah, there's something here that, networks of people with different expertises, diversity, as we come to know it, is really, it's a fundamental thing that we should be including in design processes. So that was the U101, as it was called, design thinking course. And for the second part of my talk, I wanted to move on to talking about someone called Horst Rittel. Many of you know him for his famous concept of wicked problems, of course. But there's this other idea that he came up with, which is called the symmetry of ignorance. And it's sort of he's an interesting character in design theory, or the history of design theory, in that his second generation design methods and building on his idea of wicked problems was very much more of a not about making the design process kind of linear activity, a process of analysis, synthesis, evaluation, or even now we have the double diamond of, discover, define, deliver. But much more of a sort of argumentative dialogical process, something that was based on more on sort of understanding the values of others. And this symmetry of ignorance term that he came up with is basically the idea that we all start off in a complex design situation as equally ignorant. We don't start off with, design equally ignorant about the design situation. So we bring our own expertises, but we have to build the knowledge of how to solve the design problem as we go through the design problem. So the designer isn't prioritized here as having anything exceptional. This was Horst Rittel, as I said, an interesting character, professor of design methodology, first at Ulm School of Design. I think the Ulm school is also slightly ignored, slightly in the shadow of the Bauhaus. Bauhaus is well known, obviously very influential, but I think Ulm is actually maybe a more interesting and actually ultimately a more influential school of thinking, certainly for design research and design theory. Thomas Maldonado, Horst Rittel, Bruce Archer, all studied and taught at Ulm. And when Horst Rittel went to University of California in Berkeley, that's when he started thinking about the more complex problems. He was in the Department of Architecture and Planning. I think he was a mathematician by background, and thinking about the types of problems that architects and planners have to solve. And obviously came up with the term of wicked problems. And this was really based around the late 60s, early 70s, where the realization was, well, we can solve these, these incredibly complex problems. We have the technology to put people on the moon, but we don't have the technology to solve the complex social problems around us. And wicked problems was really a sort of response to what's the nature of these complex social problems, and how can we take some of the methods that we've developed in technological solutions, putting people on the moon, and bring them into solving social problems. So he came up with this idea of the wicked problem. And from there developed theory about how design processes should be thought of as argumentative processes, as places for discussion, dialogue, conversation, sometimes argument, but aimed at getting to kind of controversies and value conflicts. He wrote many papers in the early 70s, and I've studied quite a lot of his work. He wrote a lot for the Design Methods Group, which was a publication, a Design Methods Group newsletter in the early 70s. And he wrote a paper called Some Principles for the Design of an Educational System for Design. So he's very much thinking about how we educate designers and what kinds of things that we should teach designers. So this was his idea of design as a series of issues, as a series of controversies, a series of conflicts, and resolving those things as you go through the process. It makes people understand the situation that you're dealing with, or the problem that you're trying to solve. And his basis for thinking was that getting away from this idea of the designer, the creative genius, the person that's going to come in and solve all the problems. So he has this quote that designing is not an incessant stream of creative events. It's highly patternized and organized labor, only occasionally interrupted by sudden insights and ideas. And in this paper, he introduces this idea of the symmetry of ignorance. And I think it's a nice way of thinking about where the starting points for design. Let's assume that we all know nothing about this problem, and let's see who's got the right expertise. And this quote on the slide is really his sort of response to that. How do we understand other people's expertise, and how do we bring it into solving a complex design problem? So he says the knowledge needed in doing a design problem for others is distributed among many people. So this idea of the kind of network, the actors in the network that help to solve a particular problem, and in particular those who are likely to become affected by the solution. So this is early participative design thinking. One should look for methods that help to activate their expertise. And I think I realized when I read this, I sort of immediately thought of the course that I developed in 2010 as part of a team. And what we were really trying to do was to activate that expertise, and the internet really enabled that activation. And actually,
lo mismo, como eso requiere demasiado.
And actually, some of the comments of Horst Rittel in some of his early materials sort of predict that social machines or social technology is really what's going to help think about complex design problems. So again, he's very prescient in some of the predictions that he makes about design activity. The third part of my talk I wanted to talk about is a recent blog post. I've been quite concerned or interested in the idea of politics as a kind of designing. And many of my kind of posts are about how politicians are really kind of designing our future. They're kind of shapers of the future. And the post is about one particular course of education, which is a course called Politics, Philosophy and Economics. And this is a course that's taught at Oxford University in the UK. I think one of the, well, certainly the #1 university in the UK, and I think probably number 2 or 3 in the world listings. And this is a course that's been taught at Oxford University for 100 years, over 100 years, and has been incredibly influential. So in the entire history of UK prime ministers, that's the entire history of UK prime ministers, 30 were educated at Oxford University. So 46% of all UK prime ministers have been educated at this one institution. For post-Second World War prime ministers, that figure rises to 81%. So 81% of all prime ministers after the Second World War come from Oxford University. And 5 of those, which is 30%, studied the same degree subject. They studied this subject, politics, philosophy, and economics, which is, you know, absolutely incredible when you think about it, that one degree subject could be so influential. So it's a multidisciplinary degree, first taught at Oxford in the 1920s, and it's been studied by prime ministers, senior politicians, cultural figures, power brokers from the UK and internationally. So just to name a few of the famous people that studied this course, Rupert Murdoch was a PPE graduate. Bill Clinton studied a PPE. Benazir Bhutto, Aung San Suu Kyi, all these influential people came to study this degree, not necessarily for the 3 years, but they've all had sort of contact with this course, which is an incredible alumni. And really, in my blog post, I was sort of asking the question: these people are shaping our world in front of us, and shaping the world is really a kind of design activity. And what would it mean if we could add a design to the PPE? How would we go about teaching design to these people, these politicians, these future politicians, and how would we going about that? And I sort of explore a number of different avenues and ways of doing that, and what that would mean, because design is really quite adjacent to some of these subjects. Economics tips over into design. If you think of nudge theory, that comes from a couple of economists, and that's very much about sort of choice architectures and service design. Philosophy and politics similarly have design elements to them. And I think this quote was that I came across was quite interesting. So in 2014, a PPE tutor, so PPE is tutored by professors in colleges, was asked about one of his ablest pupils, then the Prime Minister of the UK. And he was busy with constitutional change. And he describes his astonishment that he was drawing up a new constitution on scrap paper. And you don't rush fundamental change with barely a moment's thought, the visibly shaken tutor told the BBC. This seemed to me like a very interesting example of someone trying to kind of sketch a solution, a constitutional solution, incredibly, you know, important thing, but trying to kind of articulate through sketching the shape of a new constitution. And we have all these kinds of structures in our politics that are really designed structures. And I think the biggest example of this was when the UK voted to leave the European Union through Brexit, that caused all kinds of design problems, all kinds of systemic design problems, all kinds of practical problems that needed design solutions. But that design expertise was really lacking in the government. So that Prime Minister was David Cameron, and he took us out of the European Union. He was the student that the tutor was talking about, trying to design a new constitution on scrap paper. And I think if I kind of reflect on this kind of degree, it's how do we get politicians to activate expertise through using design methods? I think that idea of bringing people, assuming that you know nothing about something, bringing expertise in and accessing that expertise, that's the key thing that we need to teach, or we need to bring into other disciplines outside of design. And I think we're beginning to see that a bit more. There are structures that are beginning to sort of help discussion about the future of countries, citizen assemblies, participative designing, democratic designing, social design. All these things are really beginning to help sort of articulate our future in much better, more discussable ways. So I think that's one way that we can reach non-designers. But I do end the blog post in that giving people design skills, it doesn't necessarily always result in something that you would think of as better. So design often can end up, quite a few people that have been involved with design theory and design methods end up to the right of politics. So I think one person that actually worked for David Cameron, Steve Hilton, was someone involved with bringing design into government, and he recently presented a channel on Fox News in the US, promoting the ideas of Trump and other similar politicians. So teaching people design skills means that you don't necessarily know where they're going to end up and what they're going to do, but I think it helps articulate, a future that we can all begin to sort of understand, even if we don't agree with it. So there are the three parts of my talk. Just to maybe draw some conclusions. I think over the years I've really tried to sort of teach design and understand design as a fundamentally social process and an accessible process. And design methods really help to make design more accessible to a wider range of people. That's what they should be doing, in my view, and also following from Horst Rittel's ideas about design. One of the things that I think is the importance of a language in design and language in design literacy too. How we talk about the future is through words and through language and through ideas and through our thoughts. Obviously, there are other things involved in design, prototypes, sketches that we like to produce. But the language of design is really the most powerful, I think, particularly when you look at things like politics, which is mainly done through words, drafting constitutions, legislation, policies. These are kind of words that are discussed through words. So language is very important. And this idea of activating expertise, that's what having put this presentation together, I realized how important it is to build that into design education, not only for designers, but if we're trying to reach beyond the design discipline, that's one of the core things that I think we should be doing. I think I'll maybe leave it there and just see where the discussion goes. And yeah, hopefully I've made some connections there for everyone.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think you've made many connections. There's already questions popping up on the chat. And what we'll do is go to the first question, and you can ask the question directly. Leon, you have a question. Leon Law, would you mind coming in and ask your question, please?
Yes, Eric, thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm on the move because I have a flight to catch. So just a quick question for Peter, and thank you, Peter, for the wonderful sharing. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I am working with high school teachers in Japan to teach students solve complex problems using the design process and design-based strategies. And one of the challenge for my team is to get the teachers to understand the iterative nature of the design process and how to facilitate the students to go through that, and also using the design-based strategies. So what my main question is to find out from your opinion, because there are different ways to articulate the design process and the design thinking. So do you see a need to re-articulate the design process into a more general process for general public to understand, and especially to understand the nature of the design process, which is iterative and it is not linear? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the fundamental problem that we face as sort of design teachers, is how to kind of communicate design and not try to oversimplify. I think obviously every model, there are many models of design, and they're all based on simplifications. They're all based on you know, the idea that you start somewhere and you get somewhere else, however you do that, maybe through iterative loops or through kind of linear activity. And I think that can help. Obviously, people need to sort of have an idea of how a process will sort of play out. But actually, I think the focus should be more on, you know, how are you understanding the problem? Because I think one of the core things that people that aren't designers don't understand about design is that really design starts with confusion. And, you know, you don't start with you know, if you've got a good starting point, if an agreed starting point, that's, you know, the solution comes fairly easily from that. But designers quite often cause confusion and suggest things are inappropriate. And that process is really quite important. So in a sense, I think the teaching of design should be as much about the kind of the character of designing, you know, being playful, being questioning, throwing in random bits of information, seeing where that leads. So it's sort of like the experience of designing is quite different from how designing is represented. And I think some of the difficulties that we have with students are this sort of expectation that showing them a neat process of design sets up. So I think that's an interesting way to communicate design, but actually how we get people to experience design and then what happens during that process, how we get people to engage with each other, the structures that we use to help that engagement. I think they're the important things to work on. And maybe you don't even call it designing, maybe you call it some other activity, but it's about thinking about problems in a deep way, and then sort of thinking about proposals and possible ways of moving forward with those problems, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter, for the very useful insights. I'm going to bring this to work with my team. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
All the best with your flight, Leon. Thomas, can you come in, please? And then we have Francesco.
Thank you, Peter. Hi from Montreal.
Hello,
yes,
Thomas.
my question is concerning about the tacit knowledge. You know, the design studio where you represent ideas is a playground to know how to design and you know, manage tacit knowledge, the way you know, you find ideas and using compared to explicit knowledge. But when you are in front of lay persons that are not designers, how you deal with this missing part? The design studio is not there, so these people are not able to represent. They are not trained to deal with converse, reasoning.
Yeah.
How to do that?
I mean, I think tacit knowledge is it's one of those terms that I think sort of makes designing seem more mysterious than it is, in a way. It's sort of it's that back to that idea that, you know, there are these very skilled people that have this knowledge that sort of like they don't realize they can't articulate that knowledge, and that if we don't have that knowledge, then we're never going to be able to design. And I think some of the most interesting things, particularly in the distance learning course, was about not really saying too much about what designing is, but just to take people through a process, to get them to the end of the process, and then realize that they've got somewhere that they never thought they could get to. And they don't really know how they've done it, but it's been a very kind of practical series of challenges and problems. But they've managed to get from A to B to C, and get something at the end of it and think, well, how did that happen? You know, and it's sort of, I think tacit knowledge sort of disguises lots of things that we can articulate quite well. One of the things actually we did with the course was to create a studio. So it was we called it an open design studio. And I think the idea of a studio brings certain kinds of thinking. You know, I referred in the last answer to getting across ideas of working, like playfulness and sort of, I don't know, mucking around and, you know, throwing in things. And I think thinking of something as a studio puts you in that frame of mind. So you're in a studio, okay, we're going to do practical work. We're going to sort of like stand around. We're going to look at things. It's a different way of educating and learning, I think. So I think we should call more things studios, basically. You know, in my interest in politics, I sometimes think it's like parliamentary chambers in government as design studios. You know, they're politicians, they're working on practical questions, trying to understand issues, talking with each other. And I think, you know, they're just responding to each other. There's the tacit knowledge is in trying to understand, trying to make sense of, trying to articulate those kinds of things. But I don't think it's mysterious, and I don't think it's really helpful in a way. But thanks for the question. Yeah.
Thank you, but I think the idea of the studio is the key, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice question and a good answer, which gives us, you know, a bit of a understanding how important the naming is, essentially, and it gives us the opportunity to do certain things. If we go to Francesco Gali, and then we move on to our next.
Hi, Eric. I don't know if you have time to read my chat, because this is not my question, it's the AI question. Simply, I asked to the AI, Scholar ChatGPT 4.0, to read your paper and to propose some critical reflection based on the power dynamics, geopolitical condition, and the merging of the AI. And these are some points. And we have no time because the prompt is really huge and we have a lot of feedback. But one thing, from my personal point of view, is important: the need for a counter narrative in design education. Because look like the design, and also Peter, you are one of the master of this good quality of design. Design can save, can help, can foster. And this is correct, but there is also a propaganda behind this. There is also a political correct counter narrative. And if the AI, because again, this is not my question, and this is the AI, is the AI feedback. This is also something that we need to reflect on if we talk about education, if we talk about the future. Because, and then stop, you mentioned about what's happening in UK, no? And you know, for example, that the major part of your research was founded by Nesta and the European since 2000. And look like that even if this is a provocation, but is a provocation because we are in the same field, we invest too much in promoting good things and we produce some effect totally negative. This is also related to the question that the AI proposed to us. I don't know if it's clear. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I do, I sort of do agree that we do present design as a positive force in the world, and you know, I agree that it's not necessarily like that. There are plenty of examples where people have used very effective design for very nefarious ends. So it's not something that brings a sort of unconditional good. That's for sure. And I was reflecting on the use of AI now. Actually, when I wrote my blog post, so on the platform that I use, WordPress, you write something now, and you can get AI feedback on what you've written in order to improve what you've written. And it was interesting to kind of see what the AI recommended, that I used more bullet lists and put more images in and made it more accessible. And I think, you know, we're already in dialogue with this new technology in the things that we normally do. It's sort of, even if we're not going to interfaces like ChatGPT, that it's being used in the things that we use. And actually, now I mentioned that I'm currently working on a new course, a new master's course, and actually that's one of the fundamental problems now is, what do we do about AI? You know, how do we use that? There's completely new practices that the students are developing independent of our teaching. We're almost, as teachers, we're sort of completely behind this curve. We're trying to kind of grapple with this new technology. And it sort of reminds me a little bit of the paper about the course was, you know, 2008, there was this emerging thing called the internet. And the internet back then was very, you know, it was very positive. We're all going to communicate to each other. We're going to bring down dictatorships. We're going to, you know, this social media is going to sort of solve the world's problems. And, you know, that didn't happen. And I see a sort of familiar moment now with AI. You know, how we integrate this into our education is quite critical. I haven't really worked out the answer yet. You know, I think it's I do teach a course on designing intelligence where we're basically thinking about kind of more like workflows rather than methods and tools. It's sort of like designing workflows, creative workflows, and thinking where AI can sort of help. But really, because it's a technology that's changing so rapidly, you know, you're out of date year after year. So yeah, I think it's difficult. It's tough. So yeah, I don't really have an answer to your question, but they're just some kind of thoughts. You know, I'd be interested to see what I think. Maybe sharing some of our experiences of using AI in design education can be the best response here. You know, activating your expertise in experiments that you've done with AI. Because you know, it has good sides, it has bad sides, and it just makes different people and presents different problems. But we definitely can't ignore it, I think.
We take you on your call, Peter, and yeah, we'll you know, at some point like explore the AI and experimentation in classes.
Yeah.
We have a time for a couple of more questions. So Camila, if you can come in, and Daniel, and then we'll be wrapping up this talk.
Hello. Sorry, it's a bit late here. Thank you, Eric, for the opportunity. Thank you, everybody, for organizing this. And thank you, Peter, for a really inspiring conversation. I didn't really have a question, more a comment, maybe to trigger ongoing more of this discussion, which is that humans have been designing long before, or humans have been designing since long before there was a discipline or a discrete field. Something that I've sort of found really meaningful most recently, I spent about 10 years teaching design to business students. And there was something that you mentioned before about removing the word design from the design process can sometimes help. And perhaps going back to, you know, Simon's Sciences of the Artificial and design as this inherently human process of envisioning artifacts to achieve goals. There was something that I just wanted to quickly share from a chapter of a book that I read recently that talks about the different types of artifacts. And every time you mentioned an artifact from this political sphere, I couldn't help but think that they are all artifacts. So this book mentions theories, ideologies, paintings, songs, gardens, cities, families, professions, languages, social organizations, cultures, tools, machine systems, and nations, as all constituting artifacts of human design. So perhaps just making people aware of the artifacts that they are currently creating, even though they might not be sort of complex systems of objects and activities, as an analogy to get people to recognize that to some degree or another they are already designing, and eventually take a bit more ownership over the impacts that their designs will produce in the earlier stages of the process.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a comment. So
no,
thank you.
I think that's key. It's sort of like getting people to recognize that problems don't come from nowhere. They're created by us for us to try and solve. And actually, if you're a designer, you realize that you're going to create some future problems at some future point, I think. And I think what you mentioned there, the thing that sprung to mind was the podcast 99% Invisible. If you haven't listened to it before, I'd really recommend it. It's precisely that. It's about the infrastructures that we all take for granted, the design that's invisible in the world, and tells the stories of some really incredible, really varied artifacts and environments and systems. And they've just had a little mini series on how we're not designed for climate change in many ways. So I'd really recommend that. But yeah, thanks for your comments.
Daniel, would you mind to come in? Daniel Perez. Hello, Daniel. Daniel's question was this: what are the key concepts that should be learned in primary and secondary school about design? What are the teaching skills the teacher need? Is there some international reference curriculum model that the network can recommend? But maybe for you, like Peter, if you think about it, well, if you have the students coming into university, what sort of skills would you like to have them? What are important for them? This is the non-designers yet coming to university, want to maybe become designers, or even if they're not, just general public. So the question is, what are the skills they should have?
Yeah, I think
from design.
Yeah, I think the interesting question is if you're coming in to study economics, for example, or psychology, or I don't know, physics, how can you introduce a design module within that course and make it make sense to those people? What kinds of activities would you be thinking about? Thinking productively in a sort of an artifact-based way, in a kind of creative process-based way. I think there are ways of bringing those ideas into quite scientific, kind of non-design friendly disciplines, and that's the key challenge. I think that's where we can get some, as I try to argue in my blog post, some kind of some leverage, because these people that study these subjects go on to big careers, and if you can give them some feeling for design, then maybe they're able to shape the world in slightly different ways. But yeah, as I said previously, the skills, are developing imagination, developing awareness of what a problem is, looking at the world, in different ways, and then having the courage to sort of make new things and propose things that may appear stupid, and just to kind of like bring out surface interesting conversations. So again, I think it's about kind of structuring educational environments and producing educational tools that allow those things to happen. If you sort of say here's a design theory 101, you know, that's not really going to be that appealing to you know, people outside of design. So you have to make it sort of interesting enough and productive enough for it to stick, I think.
Now, I think this is a really nice segue to the very last question, and then we'll go to Liv. We'll close this conversation. And the question is from Sonia Masari, and she can't use audio, but she's asking essentially about are there like a different assessments for non-designers and designers? So it's about creativity. Yeah, you're talking about creativity, imagination. You know, and her question is then, okay, if we are educating or we are training non-designers as opposed to designers, then would the assessment technique, the assessment tools be different?
I think so. I mean, in the course that we designed, we were very much, all we assessed was the process. So we had a kind of rubric around the different phases of the process, and then assessed how well, you know, what kind of information was gathered, what kind of reflections on the process were given. So it's about kind of writing, it's about communicating, it's about but in the order of the particular design process that the students explored. So we got them to explore different kinds of design processes. So one is a kind of very linear process of, you know, kind of concepts, ideas, concepts, solutions, evaluation, that kind of thing. But then we had much more kind of participative design processes that were involved talking to other people, getting insights from their expertise, bringing that in, representing those. So it was all about how well you kind of articulate at any point in the process what's going on. And I think that's, you know, that's that. So for non-designers who think that they can't design because they can't produce beautiful things, or they can't draw very well, or they can't make things very well, you want to kind of get rid of that idea. I think it's sort of like the outputs of designing, in some sense, are kind of a bit like the exhaust from a car. You know, that it's everything that happens before then that's important. You know, the exhaust is sort of like just goes into the environment and affects us all, kind of thing. So but that's it. But it's quite difficult to do assess process, and traditionally design education does that in a studio environment. You know, if someone comes in, talks to you, the Donald Schoen reflective practitioner model. When you have many more students, that becomes much more difficult. So you need to kind of have different ways of scaling that. And you know, we talked about AI. Maybe there's kind of some kind of AI that can help with this sort of basic assessment. But you know, that's to be explored, I think.
I think you touched on many things, Peter, and I think it was really worthwhile to revisiting your paper from 2011, I think it was.
Yeah,
and as you can see, there's more and more questions. We won't be able to touch on all of them, but we hope to, you know, have you again maybe another in a year or two, look at maybe paper you've written, you know, even further back, you know, we can reflect on that. But before we go, let's thank to Peter for his wonderful talk, and now would like to thank everybody for their engagement also with, you know, with his ideas, asking the questions. I think it was, you know, very good. And thank you also to people like Camilo, you know, in Australia, being up at 1 o'clock in the morning, listening, participating, asking questions. Also, we have people in on the other side of the world, getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, you know, engaging again with us. So, you know, it's really nice to have everybody in. And I'll pass it on to Liv, who she will introduce the next talk. Will be in October. Liv.
Thank you, Eric. First, I would just like to say thank you to Peter, and I agree on all you said about this going back to look at some of the older papers and then reflect on what has happened since then. And Eric, when you asked me to introduce the next talk, you are a bit ahead of yourself, because the next talk has not yet been decided, if I am correct.
It
Eric,
has been.
you have,
It has been.
yes,
It's
then
the talk by the PETSIC.
yes, yes, it's a talk. No, but that's not in this.
Yeah,
I'm
but
sorry.
yeah, that's okay.
It's not the next EDSIG. It's not the next design international network. It's in another network, which is the DRS EDSIG. And that's a presentation of a special issue in Pharmacademisk based on a symposium called Perspectives on Design Literacy. Okay, I got you, Eric. And the date for that, Ursula? The date is
Octubre,
11th
11
of
octubre. 11
October,
11.
October 11, but it's not on this platform, it's on DRS platform EDSIG, so you can join there. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you, Eric. Thank you. So thank you to all. I think we're close for now, and I hope to see you on the 11th of October.
Okay, thank you all. Have a good night, everybody, or have a good morning, and enjoy your day. And Peter, thank you again. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Liv. Thanks, Ursula.
Y muchas gracias
Thank you,
a las,
everybody.
por
Muchas
la
gracias.
traducción,
Bye bye, Liv.
Yasmin.
Bye bye, Ursula.
Cheers,
Bye bye, Eric.
cheers.
And great job.